Let's get straight to the point. You're driving through Sarajevo when you take a wrong turn, realize your mistake, and start to reverse. The engine stalls. You're trying to restart it when a young man steps forward from the crowd and fires twice. The Archduke slumps forward. Blood spreads across his uniform, like spilled wine. His wife collapses beside him. You're still turning the ignition key, and the world is about to end. But before you understand how you got here, you need to know what it means to be useful. You grow up in the motor age, one of the first generation who knows engines better than horses. Your father drives a taxi. Your hands learn carburetors and crankshafts before they learn to shave. By 20, you're the best driver in Vienna. Fast, smooth, and utterly reliable. That's your only competitive advantage in a world where men like you are disposable. When the Imperial household needs drivers for the Archduke's motorcade, you're selected. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. You don't hesitate. You can't afford to. The job is simple. Drive. Don't speak unless spoken to. Anticipate needs. Survive by being invisible and indispensable. The Archduke barely acknowledges you exist. You're machinery, like the car itself. But you watch him. Everyone does. Franz Ferdinand, heir to an empire of 50 million souls. A man one assassin's bullet away from absolute power. He's cold, imperious, and surprisingly tender with his wife. The contradiction unsettles you. Monsters should be simple. You learn the routes, the protocols, how to navigate crowds that love him and crowds that don't. Bosnia is the latter. Everyone knows it. The security is a joke. Local police who might be sympathetic to Serbian nationalism. Routes published in newspapers. Open-top cars. Your hands tighten on the wheel during the briefings. But you're the driver. Your job is the car, not the strategy. Voluntary resignation from Imperial service doesn't exist. You keep your mouth shut and polish the chrome. The morning of June 28th, 1914, is beautiful. Sunny, warm, perfect weather for a parade, perfect weather for a funeral. You're driving the second car in the motorcade. The Archduke and his wife are in the lead vehicle, clearly visible, waving to sparse crowds. You follow at the prescribed distance. The route takes you along the Appel Quay, running beside the river. Buildings press close on one side, water on the other. No escape routes. Your instructor's voice echoes in your head. A good driver always knows the exits. There are none. Then someone throws something. A grenade bounces off the Archduke's car and explodes under the vehicle behind you. The blast is deafening. Shrapnel peppers your windscreen. Someone is screaming. The Archduke's driver accelerates. You follow, hands steady on the wheel, despite the adrenaline making your vision sharp and terrible. Training overrides terror. That's what they pay you for. The rest of the morning blurs. The reception. The Archduke's cold. Fury. The decision to visit the wounded officer in the hospital. You're assigned to drive. The route is changed at the last minute. Back down the Appel Quay, then a turn onto Franz Josef Street. They tell you this while you're already moving. You nod. You drive. Here's the thing about being the driver. You don't make the decisions. You execute them. When the Archduke's military governor, sitting beside you, suddenly shouts that the route has changed again, stay on the Appel Quay, don't turn, you're already committed to the turn. The car ahead has turned. You follow. Muscle memory. Training. The system you've been taught to trust absolutely. Wrong way, the governor shouts. Back to the Appel Quay. You brake. The intersection is too narrow to turn around easily. You shift into reverse. The car is a graph and stiffed, beautiful and powerful and temperamental. You've driven it a dozen times. You know its moods. You press the clutch, pull the gear lever, release the clutch smoothly. The engine sputters, dies, absolute silence except for the crowd murmuring and your own heartbeat in your ears. You turn the ignition. The engine turns over but doesn't catch. You try again, hands moving through the familiar sequence, choke, ignition, nothing. The car sits in the middle of the street, completely exposed, containing the future emperor of Austria-Hungary and his beloved wife. You're aware of people gathering, staring. You try the ignition again. That's when you see him. A young man, thin, with dark hair and burning eyes, stepping forward from the crowd outside a delicatessen. He's holding something. Your brain registers, gun. Your mouth opens to shout. Your hand reaches for the gear lever, some instinct demanding you do something, anything, but you're still turning the ignition key when he fires. The first shot hits the Archduke in the neck. The second hits Sophie in the abdomen. The sounds are impossibly small for what they accomplish. 2 cracks, 2 futures erased. You're still holding the ignition key. The engine catches. Too late, always too late. Franz Ferdinand turns to his wife. Sophie, Sophie, don't die, live for our children. Blood pours from his neck. She slumps forward, already gone. The governor is shouting. Hands grab the assassin, Gavrilo Princip. You'll learn later. A 19-year-old with tuberculosis and a cause. You're driving now, the engine finally running, racing toward the governor's residence. The Archduke is still alive in the back seat. Still trying to speak, still bleeding. He dies 13 minutes later. They don't blame you. That's the strange part. The investigation focuses on the security failures, the published route, the conspirators. Your wrong turn is mentioned briefly, then forgotten. A minor detail in a cascade of catastrophic failures. You're questioned and released. Just the driver, just following orders, just unlucky. But here's what they don't put in the reports. If you hadn't stalled, you would have been moving when Princip stepped forward. A moving target, a different angle. Maybe the shots miss. Maybe Sophie survives. Maybe the Archduke's wound isn't fatal. Maybe. The engine stalling took 5 seconds. 5 seconds that gave a dying teenager with a pistol the perfect shot at a static target. 5 seconds, an empire, 50 million lives. Austria-Hungary demands impossible concessions from Serbia. Serbia refuses. Russia mobilizes to defend Serbia. Germany mobilizes to support Austria. France mobilizes to counter Germany. Britain joins to defend Belgium. The Continental Alliance system, built as a deterrent, becomes a machine that devours nations. By August, the entire continent is at war. Within 4 years, 17 million people are dead. Empires that stood for centuries collapse into dust. The world you knew ends, and you fade into history's margins. Just the driver who took a wrong turn and stalled at the worst possible moment. You're not charged with anything. How could you be? You followed orders. You executed the changed route. The mechanical failure wasn't your fault, but every time you close your eyes, you see that young man stepping forward. You hear the engine turning over, almost catching, not quite. You feel the steering wheel under your hands and the terrible cosmic unfairness of being the person whose competence failed at the only moment it truly mattered. You never drive professionally again. Can't. Every time you touch an ignition key, your hands shake. The muscle memory is poisoned. You take work in a factory, marry, have children. Never speak about that day. Your wife knows better than to ask. The war consumes your son. He dies at Verdun, buried in mud with 100,000 others. The Archduke's children lose their father. Your children lose theirs. Different uniforms, same grief. The arithmetic of catastrophe is democratic. Years pass. The empire fragments. Austria-Hungary becomes a memory. The Archduke's assassins become martyrs or terrorists, depending on who's writing the history. You become an old man who once drove for the Imperial household. Sometimes people ask about that day. You tell them the facts, the wrong turn, the stalled engine, the shots. You don't tell them about the dreams where the engine catches on the first try, where you accelerate smoothly away, where history pivots on the axis of a functioning ignition. Those dreams are worse than the nightmares. In 1938, you die quietly in Vienna. No ceremony, no notice in the papers. The world is preparing for another war. This one will be worse, though you won't live to see it. Your obituary, if there is one, doesn't mention the Archduke. Just a factory worker, survived by children and grandchildren, 74 years old, the wars that bookend your life are treated as separate catastrophes, not chapters in the same story. But you know better. You've always known. Let's get straight to the point. You're the man who stalled the engine, not the assassin, not the conspirators, not the diplomats or generals or emperors, just the driver who took a wrong turn and couldn't restart a car. History will forget your name, but it will never forget what happened in those 5 seconds when your hands performed their trained task and the machine failed, and a teenager with tuberculosis had time to aim. The world ended because an engine stalled, because you were good at your job, good enough to be selected, not good enough to prevent catastrophe, because in a brutally efficient meritocracy of historical causation, being in the wrong place becomes your defining achievement. You were the person at the wheel when the future died. That's your legacy. That's the truth. Somewhere in Sarajevo, there's still a corner where a delicatessen once stood, where a young man stepped forward, where you turned the ignition key and the world held its breath and nothing caught. The building is different now. The empire is gone, the people are gone, but the corner remains, waiting for the next driver, the next wrong turn, the next 5 seconds that will break everything. You learned the lesson too late. Survival isn't about being useful. It's about understanding that sometimes the machine fails, and your competence becomes the hinge on which catastrophe swings. And when that happens, when history looks back, they won't remember that you were just following orders, just doing your job, just trying to restart the engine. They'll only remember that you were there, that you stalled, that the Archduke died because a perfectly trained driver couldn't make a car move when it mattered most. That's the bitter arithmetic. That's the joke. You spent your whole life being reliable, and the one moment the world needed you to be perfect, you were merely human. The engine stalled. The shots rang out. And everything that came after, the trenches, the gas, the millions dead, the empires fallen, all of it traces back to 5 seconds when your hands did everything right and the machine did everything wrong. You were just the driver. But sometimes that's enough to end the world.